Right now, I want you to close your eyes and imagine taking the perfect picture. What do you see? What does it look like? Now I want you to completely ruin that image. How did you do it? Was the photo crooked? Was it out of focus? Or did you just forget to take the lens cap off? For me, the quickest way to ruin any photo is by having the wrong exposure. And that's why today I'm going to teach you how to start shooting on manual exposure. Before we can start, it's important to understand what exposure actually is and how it works. Exposure is how much light the camera's sensor takes in while making a photo. When you let in too much light, the photo will be overexposed and start to become white. On the other hand, if you let in too little light, then the photo will be underexposed and start to look black. There are three parts of the camera which control the exposure: the shutter speed, the aperture, and the ISO. The shutter speed is represented by a fraction and controls how fast the shutter closes. The aperture, also called the f-stop, is represented by an f followed by a number and controls how wide the opening in the lens is. The ISO is represented by a whole number and controls how sensitive the camera's sensor is to light. Now that you know what exposure is, let's move on to the camera. Every camera has different controls, but typically you can control the shutter speed, aperture, and ISO by turning the respective dials. I recommend looking up where these dials are on your camera before continuing. For this video, I'm going to be using a Nikon D7500, which has a back dial for shutter speed and a front dial for aperture, along with a button for ISO that changes the back dial from shutter speed to ISO. To start, find a subject you would like to shoot and focus on it. If you're in a controlled environment, then make sure the lighting is set up the way you want before moving on to the next step. Next, turn on your camera's histogram by pressing the info button. You'll know that you've done this when the graph has appeared somewhere on your screen. If this does not work for you, then I recommend looking up a guide on how to activate the histogram for your model of camera. This tool is going to be your best friend while setting up exposure. To briefly explain how this works, the histogram tells us how much of the scene is dark, normal, and bright by showing our exposure in 11 different zones. After turning on the histogram, fill the frame with your white piece of paper. From here, begin to adjust your shutter speed and aperture until the line is in zone 5, located at the center of the histogram. You can increase the light coming in by making the shutter speed slower or by lowering the f-stop to make the lens more open. You can also increase the ISO, but be warned that this will also increase the amount of noise in your photo. Once you center the histogram, add 2 stops of exposure so that the line is now in zone 7. By putting it in zone 5, we've actually told the camera that the white sheet of paper is gray. To correct this, we need to move it over to zone 7 to make it white. After this, you're all complete. Now it's time to take that perfect picture.